Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Carnegie Mellon University. My name is Dina Haritos Tsimitis, and I'm director of the Information Networking Institute. And today we are celebrating our 25th anniversary. Woo! Have you all noticed the banners across campus and along Forbes and Fifth Avenue and downtown? I&I is literally everywhere. Celebrate it. I&I Pride. We have about 1,500 alumni in leadership positions around the globe, and one of these alumni is here to speak with us today. And he started at I&I back in 2002, right when I began as associate director. And I still remember my first meeting with him. He is a technology entrepreneur and investor, a partner at Expa, founder and chairman of AddThis, and founder of 10E9. At Expa, he collaborates with founders of Uber and Foursquare to create category-defining technology businesses. Via 10E9, Hooman works with companies like Hinge, Sweetgreen, Washio, and other startups as an investor and advisor. Prior to 10E9, he co-founded and served as CEO of AddThis, the world's largest content engagement platform per Comscore. AddThis's tools are used by a network of 15 million web publishers, reaching 1.9 billion users worldwide to increase traffic and engagement. Named one of tech's best entrepreneurs in BusinessWeek and one of iMedia's 25 most influential online marketing professionals, Hooman has been featured by NBC, ABC, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, and more. He's a contributor to Huffington Post and iMedia. But before Hooman achieved all of this, he was a student, like some of you, at Carnegie Mellon University and the Information Networking Institute. Hooman graduated in 2004 with a Master of Science in Information Networking. By that time, he had already launched his first company. Here to share his talk titled, Connected, How Networks Are Changing Everything. I'm pleased to kick off the I&I's 25th anniversary celebration by introducing Hooman Radfar.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? How are you guys doing? Yeah? You guys go to Carnival yet? Okay, I won't keep you guys too long. I'm not that far out that I don't remember that's a fun weekend. So first I want to thank Dina, everyone at Carnegie Mellon for having me here today. It's really fun to come back here. I just drove in actually with my mom and I was telling her it's been a very long time since I've had an opportunity to drive down these roads, and it's amazing how much the university's already changed. I&I has changed. Just looking back, when I first came to the I&I think it was Dina's first year as well, the program was already going through massive amounts of change with distance learning, new classes. It's amazing to see how many people are involved with it, and even in Silicon Valley, I'm seeing more and more I&I graduates. So, not surprisingly, my talk is about networks. I came here to study networks after graduating from Penn, and for those of you guys that remember, around 2002 it was the .com, so it wasn't a great time for people interested in the internet. I'm very happy that I stuck with it and stayed with the internet because it seems like it's come back in a big way. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about networks at the high level. I'm still as excited as I was about them then, and I think it's going to be even more exciting in the years to come. So I know for most of you guys here, this is pretty basic, but what I wanted to introduce at the beginning was this concept of a network. And the reason I want to talk about it because there's an important word in networking, and that's connected. A network is a group of interconnected people or systems, right? In the context of computers, it's computer networking, but the most important word in there is connected. Connections are important because they unlock potential. So for those of you guys familiar with Bob Metcalfe, he was the inventor of the Ethernet. And one of the principles that he introduced to computer science was this notion of Metcalfes Law, that the value of the network was n squared. What that means is for every node in the network, the value of that network goes up by n squared. And that's amazing when you think about the modern networks that we have today. And at the time, the Ethernet, with much smaller networks, obviously, that was just the beginning. But it's in the power of connected resources that we can really unlock the potential of humanity. So this isn't a new concept. Networks have been around for a long time. Information networking has been out for a long time. When you think back to the beginnings of human history, the inventions of language, writing, people were doing smoke signals, semaphores, all the way up to the optical telegraphy in early 1800s. But what I want to talk to you a little bit about is modern networking, or the electric networking age. So when you look at this at the beginning, you had the electric telegraph, right? And that was very seminal because of two things. One, it introduced the idea of using electricity as a medium for actually transmitting information over copper wires. And that started this whole revolution in communications where you had new methods of encoding. Now you were thinking about different mediums, right? Wireless. How do we get this information going? You move forward and you started to see innovation display, the electronic television. And this is an often debated topic. Who invented the television? Was it Philo Farnsworth or whoever? But fact remains, in the early 1900s, you started to see the beginnings of display. Moving forward, and this is probably one of the most seminal inventions that's important to the internet, was the general purpose computer. And the first general purpose computer was actually at my other alma mater, which was UPenn, and I believe Dina's other alma mater. And they invented ENIAC. And ENIAC was the first general purpose programmable computer. And so when you look at that, you had the foundations, communication and computing, and from that set forth the beginnings of a foundation that could create the modern internet. The beginnings of the internet came shortly after the integrated circuit, so when you look at ARPANET. And ARPANET's important because the initial foundations that were built actually, when you look historically, as a mechanism to have information networks work in the event that there was some sort of attack, right? So the internet was built with redundancy, distributed computing in mind, and that set up the modern foundations for something that has now made it possible for revolutions to spring forth. In the Middle East, you have different information changes in Syria. All of that started with that threat, but it was important. Moving forward, when you look at the web, TCP/IP came out in the early 80s, and from there it was kind of a rush. You had the beginnings of the World Wide Web in 1990 with Tim Berners-Lee. You had the invention of the browser with Mark Andreessen and folks at Mosaic in 93. And of course, the invention of web services in 1998 with the XML protocol. So why am I telling you all this? Well, this, if you step back, has introduced three massive concepts to the world and people who are non-technical. First is this notion of cloud computing. The second notion is the notion of social identity, the fact that we're actually all connected on a broader network. And the third is mobile. So when you look forward here, the web was really exciting, and actually I was really happy when I was in school that this was coming out. I had people down the halls from me selling companies for millions of dollars, people joining Microsoft, which at the time, believe it or not, was really cool. Apologies, Microsoft people. And it was really hard to get a job making $85,000 out of school. You had people going to investment banks who were history majors making $120,000. And we were wondering why that all collapsed. But the ideas were correct, but the timing was a little bit off. So at the bubble's peak, I suppose, in 2001, when it actually burst, there were about 400 million connected. And when you look at the business models at the time, the infrastructure simply wasn't there, right? When you looked at the cost, the number of people that were addressable online, the ways that you could actually acquire users, while the business models had a lot of vision and foresight, it was simply too early for most of those businesses. Now, some of the businesses that came out during that period, you have Amazon, eBay, Yahoo to some degree, right, are still very influential and around. But for the vast majority of those businesses, it was a very tough time. But where the first wave didn't deliver, the second wave showed up. So Web 2.0, I would say, started roughly around 2004, 2006 period, around the time when I graduated. It was something that was exciting. For those of us that missed the first wave, we were thrilled to have an opportunity to join back into the fight. But it wasn't a free-for-all as it is now. It wasn't as easy. People were still not thrilled to give 20-somethings money, but it was the beginnings. You saw companies like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter start to come out. Companies now that are mainstays in modern consumer culture, but at that time were just small social networks fighting to be alive. Now, in 2015, we have over 3 billion people online. So when you think about that, it's pretty stunning. almost half of the population of the Earth is connected via this infrastructure. That network, that desire that we had to connect and communicate, starting with the semaphores and the smoke signals, is now being realized in a modern institution, in a programmable, easy way that we can access. And when you look at it from an economic perspective, it's done pretty well as well. So there's over $1 trillion in value that's been created in terms of market cap. You look at companies like Google, you look at companies like Apple, Facebook alone, and that's just the beginning of it. There's over 40 companies now that are worth over $1 billion. And the time that it's taking to create that value is less and less and less. So to get back to those three topics that I talked about on the abstract side, cloud, social, and mobile. So cloud computing is important because it's the abstraction and realization, simplification of this concept of the web, right? This is how normal people think about it. A service lives in the cloud. We're moving from shrink-wrap software to everything being hosted. Now, for those of us in this audience, that's obvious. But 10 years ago, that was something that had to be fought out. One, Mark Benioff, who's the CEO of Salesforce, actually really fought for this term in the business enterprise. When you look at it, it's been stunning, though, the capabilities. So if you're a developer now and you want to create a new application, it's really, really easy, right? So you can go out there and storage is cheap. You have things like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure as platforms. And the cost of storage has fallen precipitously. It's insane, actually. So I think in early 80s, for 1 gigabyte, it cost roughly $1 million for a gigabyte. Now it's 10 cents, and that's falling exponentially. I think the chairman of Google, Eric Schmidt, was quoted as saying, and this was about 2-3 years ago, we're producing about 5 exabytes of data every 2 days. That's halved. So every single day, there are 5 exabytes of data being created. And all of that is stored in this construct. The second concept, which I think is really important for the go forward, is social identity. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart as someone who has worked in the space for the last 10 years. So at the beginning, social networks were a really cool place to play, have community. But what that did was aggregate audience. And the winner of this battle, at least thus far, has been Facebook. So Facebook now has over 1.4 billion people connected in their network. I believe that they would be now one of the top 3 or 4 largest countries in the world if you counted them that way. So in terms of that audience, it's stunning. And what's most stunning about Facebook is the personal identity. So in the first generation of the web, when you look at Google, for example, the web was anonymous. We were identified on the internet on websites by things called cookies. So cookies are little files that you can store little bits of data, but a website really didn't know it was me unless I logged in. Now, with Facebook, our identity is spreading across the web because Facebook has transitioned from a social network to a social platform. And what that means, and I'm sure all of you guys use this quite often, if not Facebook and Twitter, is that you can now register and log into websites using your social identity. And that has huge implications. First, what it means is that your experience on that site can be personalized. They know your first name. They know your last name. They know what you're interested in. They know who your friends are. They have a mechanism for communicating with you. That was never happened before in the history of the internet. And if you imagine every single application having that capability from a business perspective, now that means everyone is addressable down to the individual. And finally, Steve Jobs left us with his final gift, which was the realization of the mobile vision. So when I was at I&I, mobile was still very hot. We were always talking about mobile. I remember early experiments in location-based networking. I had my friends walking around with laptops and doing the equivalent of check-ins around the old I&I office. And that was in 2003, 2004. But it was with the creation of the iPhone in 2007 and the release of the App Store and all of the programs and everything else after the fact that really unleashed the potential of the web. Because for the first time, computing was available at everyone's fingertips. And so you can take, as a new developer, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you can build an application on a mobile phone, leverage web services in the cloud via Amazon, maybe Google Maps, whatever you want, and use the power of social identity to create an application that's personal and easily distributed via those networks. So you see applications growing faster than ever. So looking forward, the world is pretty amazing. Now, it's 2015, now, Google predicts that in 2020, everyone in the entire world will be connected. So think about that. Every single person on the planet will have access to the internet via device. And that's just not read access, that's write access. So what that means for those of you out in the audience is that you have the ability to build billion-dollar businesses faster than has ever happened before. And it's already happening because you can build on the cloud, you can make it addressable via social, and finally, you can deliver it via mobile and have millions of people using your application potentially within weeks. And that's really an opportunity to disrupt marketplaces. So a few examples of companies that I think are really doing a great job in the space and trends. So we're moving from UDrive to Uber. And full disclosure, I work with these guys and I'm an investor, but I'm a big believer in this vision in a broader macro sense. So Uber started in a very simple way. There was a guy in the corner in San Francisco, the iPhone came out and he said, man, wouldn't it be cool if I could push a button and have the taxi come to me? And it was that simple. But when you look at the tremendous value that's been built with Uber over the last couple of years through the power of the internet, it's astounding. The company is now valued at over $40 billion. This is a company that in 2006, 2007, when the iPhone was invented, did not exist, and now could be one of the most important companies on earth. They're now on track to book more revenue in the coming year or two than the entire market for cab and taxis in the United States. And this company didn't exist before. Why? Because they took advantage of these technologies. What's even more stunning is that they're now starting to penetrate the $2 trillion transportation market. And they've done that just by creating this new network and connecting drivers directly with users through software. Another interesting company and trend that's been coming up is hotels to homes. So for those of you guys, how many of you use Airbnb? Airbnb now is one of the single largest existential threats to the hotel industry that's existed. These guys probably spend as much time in policymaker and lawmakers' offices as they do actually developing code, because that's the battle they're fighting, much like Uber. And the disruption here is astounding. Again, you have a company that didn't exist around the invention of the iPhone for the most part, and now, when you come up to it, it's a $10, $15 billion enterprise. You've had over 25 million people stay in Airbnbs, and you have over 10 million listings on Airbnb. The total listings on the stats that I checked for hotels, the total amount of hotels available are 17 million. This is one company. And finally, this is something that I think is really interesting for the long term and a trend that's been happening. You have a new network being formed in banking. So you're moving from centralized banking and institutions to bits. And I mean that in two ways. First, you have this m-commerce. And again, these are concepts that have been coming up for 10 years that are now ready for prime time. So how many of you guys are familiar with this notion of mobile payments in Kenya? Have you heard of that? So for those of you guys that are not familiar, there's this concept called M-Pesa. It was introduced by a company called Safaricom in Kenya. So the idea is simple. The population is largely unbanked. Let's make it easy for them to store and exchange value via their mobile phones. That was introduced, I would say, in mid-2000s. Since the mid-2000s, the result has been astounding. Nearly 40% of their GDP runs through this system. It's on track for the majority of their GDP to run through the system, meaning they're going to be one of the first countries to go completely mobile. So that's just the beginning. And the reason that's just the beginning is because there are 2.5 billion people who are still unbanked in the world. That's a massive opportunity. And so when you look forward at the technologies that can change this, the internet, and in particular new protocols like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Dogecoin, make it possible for people to directly exchange value. And when you look at banking as an industry, there's no larger place that you can make a dent. And it's going to move faster. So since we started, there's already been nearly 4 billion emails sent, just in the time that you've been in this room with me. And if you look at Moore's Law, with computational power doubling every year, and assuming that holds, you look at some of the calculations by Ray Kurzweil regarding the speed, we have a lot ahead of us. In particular, in 2030 ballpark, you could have a computer, the cost of $1,000 roughly in our purchasing power, as powerful as a human brain. So imagine, in 2030, we're going to have every single person connected with devices as smart as we are, and the devices themselves being connected. So the potential of this is outstanding. So just some things that could change over time. We can move from prescriptions to personal. And I think we're going to look back at this day and say, wow, we really were archaic with respect to medicine. So right now, you look at, for instance, fields like medicine, psychiatry, and the drugs that are prescribed are based on limited sample trials, and you'll go to a physician and they will approximate based on what they see if they give you a certain drug. You're depressed or you're anxious and whatever. And if it doesn't work out and you get sick, they'll try another one. So we look back and say 100 years ago, it was crazy how people dealt with the mentally ill. I think in the next 20 years, we're going to look back and say, I think we were even crazier. So what's going to happen in the go forward when you look at this is, as all of medical records move online, and this is going to happen by law with Obamacare, so everything in the next 5 years is going to be online, and you see the movement towards the cloud, we're going to have a real renaissance in healthcare. In particular, using this big data to drive personalized medicine. So imagine you go into a physician and down to protein sequencing level for you personally, they can figure out the exact right therapy. And some of those therapies may not just be analgesic in nature, they may actually be genetic. And that's what's possible when you have computation at that level and a connected network. And this one's really fun for me, and I think all of us dreamed about this if you were a geek growing up, but this concept of artificial intelligence, whether it hits that realization that Elon Musk and Bill Gates and others fear, or whether we have just really, really awesome computers, I'm not clear, but what is clear is that within our lifetimes, we're going to have the ability to talk to a computer, have a natural language interface, and that the population of the Earth effectively could double, triple, quadruple in our lifetime with other sentient life forms like this. And the impact on us is going to be stunning. And all of you guys will be alive to see this, hopefully. So looking forward and looking back, I guess when you look at everything right now, it can be summed up in this. So in my hand right now, I can access information, and I have the same capabilities in my hand as President Bill Clinton had when he was president of the United States, right now. And so when I look at that and I think back to myself, man, what would Gutenberg have said in 1450 when he invented the printing press? And I showed him and I said, hey, that's cool. You can write that stuff down there, but I can send that message over to Dina or anyone in the world, and I can do it in less than a second. That would have looked like magic. So my challenge to you guys, my fellow I&I and everyone in the audience, is to make magic with the network. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Sure. I think right now we have some time for questions. They're going to be bringing microphones if you guys have anything. Feel free to ask me anything ranging from this presentation about venture funding, networks, whatever you want. So I think Dina gave you a little bit of my background, but I'm happy to share. We'll do analog. Go for it.
Yeah. My question is, you didn't say anything about security and privacy.
Sure.
You talked about all these great capabilities. Do I have to give up on my privacy?
That's a great question. Sure. So the gentleman asked about security and privacy, and do I have to give up on privacy in order to leverage some of these capabilities? My honest answer is right now, I think it's unknown. And I think the trade-off is something that we should all be conscious about right now, because if you want to have 100% security, then you end up trading quite a bit on privacy. And I think that's something societally that we have to all work on this side. I do know with the current internet, in particular with the companies I've been associated with in the past, what's happening is we're moving towards something where we get notice and choice, right? And in particular, when you look at online advertising as one of these industries that's collecting our data and then leveraging that for personalization. So the notion being that we should have an opportunity to know exactly what's being collected about us and have a choice whether to opt in or opt out. And I think that's a best practice and standard that's happening already on the internet. I think what's going to be more interesting, though, is, again, moving towards this exabyte vision. How, as human beings, are we even going to understand how to make choices? And that's a broader question and something that should be researched because there'll be too much data.
So Dina's asked me to weigh in. Hi. Oh, I'm Michelle Dennedy. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer for Intel Security.
Great. I'm ready to get schooled.
We will have privacy and security in the future. And actually here at I&I and Carnegie Mellon, we have Lori Craner's excellent work with usable privacy, as well as a couple of my students here of privacy engineering. Are you guys here yet? Oh, they're so busted. Oh, yay, hi. I haven't even met them in person yet. So we teach privacy engineering out of the Silicon Valley campus, and we've been doing back and forth. Privacy, as defined as secrecy and sequestration, is a little bit of a dinosaur, but privacy as the authorized processing of personally identifiable information according to FAIR principles is here to stay, and it's something that can be built and will be built and should be built and will make people money when they build it into the networks. And I'm a huge believer in that, and we're learning how to do it here at Carnegie Mellon with these students today going forward. So it's not over yet. Humanity wins in this one.
Anyone else have any questions? I see some hands in the back.
Can you mention any courses that you took in I&I that were useful in when you invested in companies like, business management or anything else?
Which of my professors are in here? All of them. No. Actually, honestly, and this is no joke, this was instrumental because the classes I took were very practical. And what I found about Carnegie Mellon that I loved a lot was that they combined strong theory with rigorous practice. I remember, and I think I said this in the commencement speech that I had, Raj was telling us, hey, when you leave here, you're going to be warriors. And I was kind of laughing because I'm like, I'm pretty good. And I was wrong. He beat me up pretty bad. Some classes, though, that depending on what area you want to go into, I mean, like, I really enjoyed Dave Lamont's class. I actually am going to meet with him later. I'm trying to think what else. Like all of the stuff in what was it called then? It was GSIA, now called Tepper. The finance. I think some of the basics to make sure as technology students that you just understand the basics so that when you go into that world, you can understand the mechanics. But a lot of business, it's easier to grok than engineering. Like business people have a lot more trouble learning engineering because there's a lot of fundamentals there. But I think applying engineering principles back to business is easier. I see you in the back, but. And sorry if I'm squinting a bit.
No, that's fine. Thank you for the presentation. I had a question. I know you kept mentioning that, by 2030, the world will be connected. But as if you see right now, 2/3 of the world population does not have internet or technology access. What are some of those projects and ideas which will help, especially in the emerging markets where infrastructure is a big problem? What are some of those ideas that you think are going to be successful to get people on technology?
That's a great point. So I think Peter Diamandis has this great quote about the rising billion. And I think a lot of the progress in the modern internet to date has been in first world. And now the challenge, and I think a lot of companies are answering that call, is in the emerging world. And I think what you'll see are fundamentally different networks, by the way. A lot of the networks here come from more centralized principles. I think there you're going to start with distributed. So power networks are going to start distributed with like solar, telecommunications. I think you'll see they started with cell phones. I mean, they're going to skip whole technology sets that we had, like credit cards. And I think some of the projects that at least I've been following, so I love what Facebook's doing with internet.org. That's pretty interesting if you want to follow that. I think what Mike Cassidy's doing at Google with Project Loon is really great. So for those of you guys not familiar with both, it's the use of automated drone technology, low-flying stuff, there's different implementations of how they're doing this to basically fly around the world and become a floating internet. And so I've seen some of the Project Loon stuff, and it's unreal. They have some of the best people at Google working that. I think things like that, when the first step is to provide access. I think actually what you'll see is there's a lot of mobile phones. The biggest problem actually that I've seen is power. So you'll see in India, you can see whole villages that will all have cell phones, but they will not have ready access to power. And so I think that actually is an interesting challenge for people in information networking, which is how do we build distributed power infrastructure such that we can enable this computing.
Yeah, so you mentioned about internet.org, the Facebook project.
Sure.
Don't you think it is kind of a blow to net neutrality?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Don't you think it's kind of a blow to net neutrality?
I don't know yet, is my honest answer, because we haven't really seen what it's going to do. I think it's going to be interesting to see when you have, I'll say, semi-regulated to unregulated. So part of the problem and opportunity in the emerging world is the regulatory infrastructure is very different than the United States. And actually, I'll tell you another class. Dr. Serbu's telecommunications class on the policy was actually very helpful on this type of stuff. But the regulations and that infrastructure here are very different than the emerging world. And so I would say right now it's too soon to tell. Oh, my God. That was good. See, I didn't even know. I still remembered. But yeah, I think when you look at internet.org, I mean, that's the challenge that's going to be to Google and all these other incumbents. When you have companies, I mean, look at the M-Pesa example. Safaricom can potentially damage 40% of Kenya's GDP. That's a big deal. Even if I'm off by half, and it's 20%, that still could destroy their market. So I think that that's going to be a big challenge in general, not just net neutrality, but any sort of system that these companies are building. They can own whole economies.
So I asked this question because there is a huge movement going on in India for net neutrality, and regarding so there have been many news regarding this that many companies in India are pulling out of internet.org because of this.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's up to the policymakers at Facebook. We'll see how it turns out, but I have a feeling if people get internet, I think they're going to not want to give it back. So we'll see how Facebook can get it. But that's a great point. I don't know.
Thanks. It's really eye-opening the way you've tied things together from the past to the future. Question, what does the Internet of Things mean to you, and what does this mean for students here and the future economy?
Well, so the Internet of Things, I think conceptually is something, again, that's been around longer than people would think, right? This idea of network devices, smart devices talking to each other. From what I understand, I mean, there's like $1 trillion in market impact that's going to have. So whether it's smart cities down to a smart shower, and I think the opportunities are boundless. I think right now, the chicken and the egg is, how does this happen? How does this roll out? So Google, for example, when you look at it, I think made a smart move in acquiring Nest and saying, hey, we're going to have a Keystone thermometer. And then they have smart guys, by the way, CMU alum, who was there. They used to play Warcraft with us, actually, believe it or not. So that, starting with a really killer app, kind of like Apple did, and then they bought Dropcam, and they're going to have all of these killer apps within the home. I think people have been very focused on standards, and that's kind of how the internet started, but that's not how it's going to get spread. I think there needs to be commercial applications vertically integrated to demonstrate the power of this stuff, and then the winner of those vertically integrated, again, like Dropcam or Nest, like get in every home and then spread. So I think it's going to come that way.
One last question here, because we're close to the end of the session. But any parting words of wisdom, anything, if you could turn back the clock, you would do differently, or any just departing words to the current students who are here?
I would say, I don't know. I'm not really, I haven't really done anything the traditional way in a long time. So I guess the best thing I would say to you is you have to just make sure that you understand risk. I think sometimes people, as human beings, our heuristics on risk are pretty messed up. And I think sometimes you think going into, for instance, a large company or a big established company is going to make your life easier, it's de-risked. But having gone through, for example, that crisis in 2008 and seeing people at Wells Fargo and all these other people I employed, and I had a job, I kind of got a stark wake-up call that my fundamentals were that, oh yeah, the economy is going to be good and these big companies are going to be fine, but you look at some of these titans when I was in school, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, they're not there. I mean, they were huge. I mean, they were just like, you can't imagine this thing's not there. So I guess what I would say is double down on yourself, make sure that you have the right skills, and I would say try to fail fast. And a lot of the things that you think are really risky, like take a year to work at a startup or those types of things, I'm not saying they're not going to have impact in your career, but in the scheme of things, when an employer's looking at your LinkedIn and if that thing didn't work out, it's like one bullet. But if that one bullet works out, it'll change the rest of your life. So I would say fail fast. Thanks. Should I take my computer?
I'm very proud to say I knew Hooman way back when. But here, I'd like to present you.
Oh,
before we
thanks.
go. Can you open it and show everybody? And I
I
hope you
will.
wear it with pride.
Is it closed?
One item of clothing.
Oh, finally, gear. This is good. So this is good, thanks. Thank you.